It was a crisp Saturday morning in Maple Grove, a suburban neighborhood known for its manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and a quiet community reputation. Karen Whitman, a 45-year-old real estate agent, adjusted her sunglasses as she stepped on her front porch, coffee mug in hand. Her blonde hair was tied into a tight ponytail, and she wore an expensive tracksuit that matched the clean, minimal aesthetic of her modern-style home. Her eyes scanned the street like a hawk surveying its territory. Every Saturday followed the same pattern for Karen. She would sip her coffee, scroll through social media, and keep an eye on the unfamiliar faces that dared to walk through her neighborhood. It's not nosiness, she often told herself. It's community vigilance. Her Neighborhood Watch app was always open, and her notifications were set to high alert. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted a boy on a bicycle riding slowly along the sidewalk. "Who is that?" she muttered, lowering her sunglasses to get a clearer look. He wasn't familiar. He wasn't from here. He wasn't one of the neighborhood kids she had seen at block parties or school pickups. Her gaze lingered on him a moment too long, suspicion growing in her mind. What is he doing here? Her coffee suddenly didn't taste as good. She tapped on her phone, ready to open the Neighborhood Watch app. Can't be too careful these days, she thought, tapping her fingers on the edge of the porch railing. Her heart beat a little faster, a subtle rush of control and vigilance washing over her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the street, 12-year-old Jamal Harris was lost in his own world, the front wheel of his bicycle wobbly as he tried to keep his balance. His backpack hung loosely off one shoulder, swinging side to side as he pedaled slowly, humming a song from his favorite video game. His curly hair peeked out from under his red cap, and his eyes darted between the houses, counting numbers on mailboxes. 3521, 3523. 3525, almost there, he whispered, eyes fixed on the numbers. He was on a mission to deliver a book he had borrowed from his classmate, Marcus, who lived just a few houses down. His mom had told him to return it today, and he wanted to do it before his favorite cartoon started at noon. Jamal loved biking through different neighborhoods. Each street had its own vibe. Some were quiet, like this one, and others were lively with kids playing basketball or riding skateboards. But this street was different. Too quiet. No dogs barking, no kids playing, just the sound of his tires on the pavement. He glanced up at the houses, noticing how perfect they all looked. Not a single trash can left out. Every lawn perfectly cut. His heart felt a little tight, like it always did when he entered unfamiliar places. His mom's words echoed in his head. Don't linger too long in places you don't belong, baby. People don't always see you as a kid. They see you as a threat. He shook it off. I'm just a kid delivering a book, he told himself, eyes now locked on the house just a few doors away. Maple Grove was a picture-perfect suburban paradise, the kind you'd see in real estate brochures. The streets were wide, lined with sycamore trees whose leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Every house had a porch swing, a flower bed bursting with color, and spotless driveways free of stains. The neighborhood was the kind where people called their landscapers to fix that one weed growing out of the driveway. The street felt serene, but there was something beneath that serenity, a subtle, unspoken divide. Most of the families in this community looked the same, drove similar SUVs, and attended the same PTA meetings. They shared cookie recipes and waved politely at joggers, but grew tense at the sight of strangers walking past. It wasn't outright hostility, just the quiet, uneasy kind of suspicion that lingered in the air like the faint smell of bleach. On one side of the street, Karen's house stood out. It had sleek, modern architecture with large black window frames contrasting against white stucco walls. Her front lawn had a minimalist garden of succulents and gravel stones, giving it a modern chic look. Across the street, there was a mix of older, more traditional homes with red brick exteriors and wide front porches. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids rode scooters, parents jogged in matching tracksuits, and strangers stuck out like a sore thumb. Neighbors knew each other, at least by face, if not by name. A new face, especially a young black boy on a bike, didn't go unnoticed. People didn't always mean harm, but they watched. They watched closely. That day, only a few people were outside. A couple jogged down the block, earphones in, oblivious to the world around them. A man was mowing his lawn, headphones on, his back turned away. And of course, there was Karen on her porch, eyes fixed on Jamal like a hawk tracking its prey. Her gaze was sharper than the crisp autumn air. Jamal's presence disrupted the calm control of this community, but only Karen noticed. To everyone else, he was just a kid on a bike. But to Karen, he was an unfamiliar element in a familiar world, and that was enough to raise alarms. The silence was broken by the faint hum of distant lawnmowers, the soft shuffle of leaves blowing down the street, and the rhythmic click-click-click of Jamal's bicycle chain. The peaceful atmosphere should have been comforting, but for some reason, it wasn't. Karen's fingers hovered over her phone, her eyes locked on the boy. She watched as he slowed down near a house, Marcus's house, and reached into his backpack. Her mind filled in the blanks. What's he pulling out? A weapon? A tool? Why is he stopping here of all places? She thought, heart rate picking up. Her breathing grew shallow. The Neighborhood Watch app had warned of suspicious activity a few days ago. She didn't remember what the alert was about, but it didn't matter. This boy didn't belong here. Her eyes flicked to the phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. 911. Across the street, Jamal pulled out a book, a bright, colorful paperback. He flipped it over, checking the cover to make sure it was the right one. Yeah, this is Marcus's, he whispered, satisfied. He shoved it back into his backpack, still focused on his mission. Karen's phone was already ringing. She glanced at him one more time, lips pressed into a thin, sharp line. The calm air was now tense with unspoken judgment. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. Her voice was low but firm. Yes, I'm sure. He's on a bike, stopping at houses, looking into bags. She didn't know that every word she spoke was being recorded. Karen's voice was steady but sharp as she spoke into her phone. Yes, I'm at Maple Grove, near 35th Street. There's a young man here. He looks suspicious. He's riding around on a bike, stopping at houses, looking into bags. I think he might be scoping them out. Her eyes stayed fixed on Jamal, her gaze unwavering, filled with a mix of self-righteousness and quiet fear. The dispatcher asked a question. Karen tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as if trying to get a clearer picture of him. Yes, he's black, about 12 or 13, wearing a red cap and a blue hoodie. No, I don't know him. He doesn't live around here. Her tone shifted into something colder, more certain. Just send someone quickly, please. Her hand tightened around her phone as she ended the call. Her heart pounded, adrenaline flooding her veins. She'd done her part. She'd protected her neighborhood. But still, she stayed on the porch watching him like a hawk watching a rabbit that didn't know it was being hunted. Jamal pulled his bike up to Marcus's driveway. His bike skidded slightly on the concrete, and he grinned, proud of the sharp stop he had just pulled off. His eyes flicked toward the house. No one answered the door, so he hopped off his bike, reached into his backpack, and pulled out the book he'd come to return. It was bright orange with bold letters on the cover. Across the street, Karen's eyes widened. What's that? What is he pulling out? Her thoughts raced. Her breaths came faster now. Her mind connected dots that didn't exist. Is it a crowbar? A tool? A weapon? She watched him walk up to the porch, place the book on the welcome mat, and tap it once to make sure it didn't blow away. He's leaving something on the porch, she muttered aloud, already picking up her phone again. Maybe it's a marker. Maybe it's a signal for someone else to come back later and rob the place. Her imagination spiraled, fed by years of subtle biases and neighborhood watch warnings. Her phone buzzed. A notification from the Neighborhood Watch app, suspicious person alert. Male, mid-20s, hoodie, seen on Elm Street. Karen glanced at it and then back at Jamal. She didn't process the details. She didn't think about how mid-20s didn't describe the child in front of her. She just knew one thing. It fits the description. She dialed 911 again. This time, her voice was more urgent. Yes, I called earlier. He's still here. He just left something on the porch. I don't know what it is, but I'm concerned it's dangerous. Please hurry. Jamal adjusted his backpack, stepping back from Marcus's front porch. His job was done. He dusted his hands together like he'd just finished a big task and grinned. Mission complete, he mumbled to himself. He glanced at his watch. I'll make it back in time for the show. He turned back to his bike and froze. Across the street, He saw a woman staring directly at him. Not glancing. Not looking. Staring. Her phone was pressed against her ear, her lips moving quickly. Her eyes were locked on him like he was some kind of threat. His heart thumped hard in his chest. He glanced down at his hoodie, his sneakers, and his bike. Am I doing something wrong? He thought. Nah, I'm just returning a book. But still, he felt that familiar chill. His mom had warned him about it. If they start staring too long, just keep moving, baby. Keep moving and stay calm. He grabbed the handlebars of his bike, trying to ignore her, but his fingers shook. He didn't like being watched. It made him feel like he'd done something wrong, even though he hadn't. Don't look. Don't react. Just ride away. His legs felt heavier than usual as he mounted the bike. Suddenly, a police car turned the corner. Red and blue lights flashed, no sirens, just flashing lights. Jamal's chest tightened. His hands gripped the handlebars tighter. No way, no way, no way, he muttered. His heart felt like it was about to leap out of his chest. The car slowed as it approached. Jamal's eyes darted to Karen, still on her porch, phone in hand, her eyes locked on him. She called them on me, he realized. I didn't do anything, though. His mind ran through every option. Should he run? Should he stay still? Should he say something? His mom had told him never to run. Running makes him think you're guilty. He stood frozen, breathing in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his ears. The police cruiser rolled to a stop, tires crunching softly against the asphalt. The officer inside watched Jamal carefully through the windshield. A second officer stepped out from the passenger side, adjusting his belt as he approached. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his stance was firm, like he'd done this 100 times before. Jamal's hands shot up slowly, palms facing forward. He'd seen people do this in movies and on TV. He didn't know if it would help, but it felt like the right thing to do. His voice shook as he said, I didn't do anything. The officer didn't respond. He just kept walking toward him, slow and steady. The silence was louder than any siren. Jamal glanced around. No one else was stopping to watch. The jogger from earlier kept running, glancing for a second but not stopping. The man mowing his lawn had his headphones in, oblivious to everything. Karen stayed on her porch, phone in hand, watching like she was at a live-action theater. Her lips pressed into a smug line, the look of someone who believed they'd done the right thing. The second officer approached Jamal. What are you doing here, kid? He asked. His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't kind either. Where do you live? I'm just delivering a book, Jamal said quickly, pointing at Marcus's porch. I'm just dropping it off for my friend. I live 2 blocks that way. The officer tilted his head, skeptical. How do we know that's true? He asked, his hand resting near his belt. Jamal's heart dropped. He'd never felt so small in his life. Check the porch, he said softly, voice cracking. I didn't do anything, but no one moved toward the porch. No one checked. Instead, the officer stepped forward, looking him up and down. You got ID, kid? Jamal's hands were still in the air. I'm 12, he said, voice trembling. I don't have ID. Karen watched it all, sipping her second cup of coffee like it was a TV show. She didn't expect what would happen next. She didn't know that someone else was recording. Step off the bike, kid, the officer said firmly, his eyes shielded behind dark sunglasses. His hand hovered near his utility belt, fingers just inches from his taser. Jamal hesitated, his eyes darting from the officer to Karen, who was still standing on her porch. She folded her arms, chin raised, her gaze steady with self-assured confidence. That's him, officer, she called out. That's the one I told you about. He was going through people's porches. Ma'am, stay where you are, the officer barked, glancing at her briefly. His attention quickly returned to Jamal. You heard me, kid. Off the bike. I didn't do anything, Jamal said, his voice cracking as he climbed off the bike slowly, arms still raised. His heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst out of his chest. What's in the bag? The officer asked, gesturing toward Jamal's backpack. Books, Jamal replied, his voice barely above a whisper. School books. And my lunch. Take it off. Jamal's hands shook as he slipped one arm out of the backpack strap, then the other. He held it away from his body, not wanting to make a sudden move. The officer snatched it from him, unzipped it, and peered inside. His brow furrowed as he pulled out a hardcover book with bright orange letters on the front. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "It's Marcus's book," Jamal said. "He let me borrow it, and I was just bringing it back." The officer glanced at the book, turning it over, frowning like he expected something more sinister. His partner finally stepped out of the car and approached. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Got a call about a suspicious kid," the first officer said, eyes still on Jamal. "Lady says he's been checking out porches." The second officer eyed the book in his partner's hand, then glanced at Karen, standing stiffly on her porch. "That the caller?" he asked. "Yep," the first officer replied. The second officer glanced at Jamal, his face softening just slightly. "He's a kid," he muttered under his breath. But no one moved. "Hey, what's going on here?" a man's voice called out. A tall man in a gray hoodie approached from down the street, phone in hand, camera already recording. His eyes flicked from Jamal to the officers to Karen. He had a sharp, determined expression, like he'd seen this play out before. "Why are y'all messing with that boy?" he asked, walking closer but stopping at a safe distance. "What did he do?" The officer with the sunglasses shot him a warning look. "Stay back, sir. We're handling it." "Yeah, I see that." The man shot back, angling his phone to get everything in frame. "All I see is a kid being harassed for riding his bike." Karen's head snapped toward him. "He was looking at people's houses. He was leaving something on porches," she insisted, her voice louder now, more defensive. The man chuckled darkly. "Yeah, like that suspicious package that looks like a library book?" He pointed toward the officer still holding the book. "Y'all out here wasting police time 'cause you're scared of a kid?" Other neighbors began to peek out of their homes. A woman stepped outside holding a baby on her hip, squinting at the scene with concern. A man watering his lawn turned down the nozzle, his eyes locked on the situation. "Everything okay over there?" he called out. "Mind your business," Karen snapped. Her face had changed. She didn't look as sure of herself anymore. Her eyes darted toward the man with the camera, and she took a small step back. "This is our business," the man said, keeping his phone steady. "Every time you'll call the cops on us, it's our business." The officer glanced at his partner, who now looked a little less sure as well. "All right, that's enough," he said to the bystander. "Step back, or I'll have to ask you to leave." "I'm on a public sidewalk," the man shot back. "And I'm recording this whole thing." Karen bit her lip, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Jamal stood frozen, his heart pounding like a drum. He felt small, exposed, like every move he made would be the wrong one. "I just wanted to return the book," he thought, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment. "Why is this happening?" His mind flickered back to his mom's voice. "Keep your head down, stay polite, don't give them a reason." She always told him that, always. But his head was spinning, and every breath felt like it got stuck halfway. He glanced up at the man with the camera, his only source of hope. The man gave him a small nod, like he was telling him, "I got you." Jamal felt his eyes burn, a lump forming in his throat. He didn't want to cry. "Not here. Not in front of them. I didn't do anything," he said again, his voice softer this time, like he wasn't sure anyone would believe him. The officer's gaze flickered for a moment. The second officer, the one who seemed a little calmer, bent down slightly to Jamal's level. "Look, kid, nobody's saying you did. We just got a call, and we have to check it out, all right?" Jamal nodded quickly, eyes darting to the man with the camera. "It's just a book," he repeated. "I put it on my friend's porch." "That's it?" The first officer glanced at the book, turning it over again. For the first time, he seemed to actually see it. Bright orange cover, bold letters. No reason for it to be a threat. He exhaled through his nose. "Kid, you can relax," he muttered. "Go home." Jamal's eyes flicked to Karen. She was glaring now, her arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. She looked away when he met her gaze. "I told you," Jamal said, wiping his face quickly before anyone could see the tears. "I didn't do anything." The man with the camera hadn't stopped recording. In fact, two more people had their phones out now, the woman with the baby and the man watering his lawn. It wasn't just one video anymore. It was three. "Y'all gonna be famous," the man in the gray hoodie muttered. He turned the camera toward Karen, zooming in on her face. "You want to say something for the camera, Karen? Since you're so brave calling the cops on a kid, Her face flushed red. "Don't record me," she hissed, turning away, but it was too late. Her face was on all three phones, her voice had been captured, and her name would soon be in the captions of posts she would never control. "Yeah, that's what I thought," the man muttered. The officers didn't stop them from recording. They knew better now. Karen pulled out her phone and quickly ducked inside her house, but it didn't matter. The internet moves faster than a slammed door. "They'll see," Jamal thought as he grabbed his bike, his legs still wobbly. "They'll see I didn't do anything." 2 days later, Karen sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone with an anxious flick of her thumb. Her living room was quiet except for the faint hum of the TV playing in the background. Every few seconds, her eyes darted toward the window, as if she expected to see someone staring back at her. "Why is this still going viral?" she muttered to herself, tapping on the video that had now amassed over 2.7 million views. On the screen, there she was, standing on her porch with her arms crossed, eyes narrowed with that same haughty glare. The text overlay read, "Karen calls cops on black kid for returning a library book. This is America." Her heart dropped every time she saw it. The footage, captured from 3 different angles, was stitched together like a mini-documentary. Her voice, sharp and insistent, echoed out. "He was looking at porches. I know what I saw." Then it cut to Jamal, his eyes wide with fear, his hands trembling as he handed his backpack to the officer. Her words played back again in slow motion. "I know what I saw." The irony of it all hit her harder every time. She didn't know what she saw. She'd assumed. She'd reacted. And now, millions of strangers were calling her everything from a racist to a monster. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting her out of her thoughts. A text message. "Mom, delete your Facebook. It's everywhere." Her daughter. She clenched her jaw, fingers hovering over the screen. Delete Facebook? As if that would erase it. Ding! Another notification popped up. This time, it was a link to an article. Neighborhood Karen falsely calls cops on black child returning book. Faces public backlash. Karen tossed the phone down like it had burned her hand. Her breathing quickened. Her chest tightened. Her face flushed with heat. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, shame. While Karen hid inside her house, the internet had already made its decision. Clips of the incident were plastered across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and even YouTube. Memes spread faster than wildfire. People added captions like, "Meanwhile, in suburbia, her Wi-Fi was fast, but her judgment was faster." The hashtag bookboy began trending, and within hours, people started sharing their own stories of being accused of looking suspicious while minding their business. The story had become bigger than Karen, bigger than Jamal. It was a symbol now. An account called @JusticeForJamal popped up, and it grew to 150,000 followers in one day. The man in the gray hoodie, whose name was revealed to be Andre Matthews, had taken his footage and uploaded a breakdown of the event, complete with commentary. "This right here," Andre said, pausing the video on Karen's face. "This is what it looks like when somebody thinks their assumptions are more important than a child's safety." The comment section was flooded with outrage. "This woman needs to be fired immediately. Tag her job. She's got to learn. Her face is going to be a meme for years." That same evening, a local news station ran a segment on the story. They interviewed Jamal's mother, Monique. Her voice cracked as she spoke. All he was doing was returning a book. A book. Her eyes filled with tears. He came home shaking. He thought they were going to take him away. The camera cut back to the anchor, her face grave. This story is a harsh reminder of how racial bias can escalate even the simplest actions into dangerous encounters. Karen sat at her kitchen table, eyes locked on her phone. It was buzzing with notifications. Texts, emails, mentions. Her boss had called earlier, asking for a meeting tomorrow morning. Her chest felt heavy. It had been a long time since she'd felt embarrassment like this. Not the kind you get from a slip of the tongue, but the deep, soul-crushing kind that makes you question your whole life. Her husband walked in, arms crossed, his eyes hard. He didn't say a word, just glanced at the phone buzzing on the table. "You did this," he said quietly. "You could have just stayed inside." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She couldn't say it wasn't her fault. She couldn't blame anyone else. On the other side of town, Jamal sat on his bed, scrolling through his own phone. His mom sat beside him, watching him carefully like he might break at any moment. He scrolled past the same video Karen had seen, except from his perspective, the captions were different. Black kid harassed for returning a library book. He deserved none of this. Jamal stared at his face on the screen, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't even recognize himself. "You all right, baby?" Monique asked, placing a hand on his back. He sniffled but nodded. "Yeah, it's just weird. All these people talking about me." She pulled him close, hugging him tightly. "They're talking because they see you, baby. They see you. They know you're good." Jamal leaned into her, eyes brimming with tears. It felt like the weight on his chest was finally lifting. For 2 days, he'd felt like the world had been staring at him like he did something wrong. Now, finally, people saw him for who he was, a kid just trying to be a good friend. Meanwhile, Karen's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from her boss. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. "Hi, Karen," her boss said, voice colder than usual. "We need to talk about the video." Her heart dropped. Jamal woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing, the notifications relentless. His mom's gentle hand on his shoulder was the first thing he felt. "You all right, baby?" Jamal nodded, blinking the sleep from his eyes. The day before had been overwhelming, but today, there was a sense of calm. His community had rallied around him in ways he hadn't expected. His phone lit up again with a message from his best friend. "We got your back, Jamal. Let's go get ice cream later." Jamal smiled. His best friend, Carlos, had posted a story with the hashtag Justice for Jamal, sharing the incident and encouraging everyone to support him. His neighbors, too, were showing support. Ms. Thompson, the elderly lady who lived 2 doors down, had brought over homemade cookies with a note. "Keep being you, Jamal. We see you, we love you." Monique had been overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. She had spent most of the morning answering messages from people who had seen the video and reached out to her, expressing support. "We're with you, Jamal," one message said. "This wasn't right, but we'll make sure people know it wasn't your fault." Even his school principal called to assure them that he was safe and that the school was taking steps to foster a more inclusive environment. It was a relief to know that he wouldn't have to return to school and face people who treated him differently. The emotional toll was still there, but it was slowly beginning to feel like his story, wasn't just about that moment of fear. It was about the community that had shown him, in real time, that love and support could overcome hatred. Across town, Karen sat in a small conference room at her job, a pit growing in her stomach. Her boss, Sandra, sat across from her, her arms crossed and her expression hard. The HR representative, a woman Karen didn't recognize, was also present. "Karen," Sandra began, her voice calm but firm. "I've reviewed everything. The video, the reports, the statements." Karen felt her face flush, her throat tightening. "This is a serious issue. You know this, and we have to take it seriously." Karen swallowed hard, nodding. She had been suspended pending further investigation. She wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but it didn't feel good. But something had shifted in her. As she sat there, waiting for the inevitable consequences, she couldn't escape the feeling she'd been wrestling with since the incident. The weight of Jamal's fearful eyes, the growing backlash online. It was all too much to ignore. I acted out of fear, and I didn't even take a moment to question why. I've been so quick to assume, to judge, to act like my experience was the only one that mattered, she confessed, her voice shaky. Sandra nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Recognizing the problem is the first step, Karen." Karen wasn't sure where this path would take her, but for the first time, she felt the need to change. She wasn't sure how to make things right, but she knew it would start with being honest about her biases, something she had never done before. Jamal stood in his backyard, staring at the bright blue sky. The pain of the incident had started to fade, replaced by a quiet resilience. He thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the confusion, the way his body had tensed as the officer had approached him. But now, as he stood there in the warmth of the sun, something had shifted. "I'm not what she thought I was," he said softly to himself, his fingers brushing the rough bark of the tree nearby. "I'm not the fear people have. I'm not the target of their hate. I'm just a kid trying to do right. He took a deep breath. The world could be heavy at times, but there was strength in knowing who he was and feeling the weight of his community's support. He wasn't going to let one woman's prejudice define his future. I'm going to be all right, he whispered, the words feeling more certain than they ever had before. A week later, Jamal stood outside the library, holding a book in his hand. This time, he wasn't returning it. He was walking out, a free smile on his face, his best friend by his side. "You good, man?" Carlos asked, grinning. Jamal laughed, the weight of the past week lifting off his shoulders. "Yeah, I'm good." As they walked past the front of the library, Jamal spotted Ms. Thompson, who waved at him from her porch. He waved back, feeling the warmth of her support. He could see his mom through the window of their house, sitting at the kitchen table with a smile on her face. The house had become a safe haven in a world that sometimes didn't feel so safe, but they were facing it together. Meanwhile, Karen was slowly coming to terms with her actions. She had started reading about racial bias, attending therapy, and taking part in community discussions about prejudice. It wasn't easy, but she was committed to learning, to growing. As Jamal and Carlos turned the corner, heading toward the park, Jamal felt the softest breeze against his face. It was as if the world had offered a quiet, hopeful reminder. Change was possible. Healing was real. And Jamal was proof that, even in the face of hate, resilience could shine brighter. Stories like these remind us of the importance of standing against injustice. If this inspired you, share it to spread awareness. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and change.